mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everyone, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 5, Episode 5 of FX's Snowfall, entitled The Iliad Part 1. You know, when I looked at this title, and I saw it last week, because I mentioned at the end of the previous video that I noticed that the next episode was called The Iliad Part 1, which implies a Part 2. And whenever you have like a two-part episode, particularly something like this in the middle of a season, usually you'll get something like that at the beginning or the end of a season. But whenever you have something like that, it implies a some sort of cliffhanger to end part 1, which we do get to a degree at the end of this episode. But what I mainly thought of is that title, the Iliad. When I think of the Iliad, well, let me start by saying very briefly, I'm no Greek expert here, but I am familiar that the Iliad is one of the poems written by Homer, along with the Odyssey, that kind of refers to or tells the story of the Trojan War, of the Greeks versus Troy. And even though I know that the story is essentially one of just kind of like the back and forth nature of this war, Achilles' involvement in it or lack thereof, and then his re-entry into it, how that impacted the war. When I think of the Iliad, though, even though this is not part of the Iliad itself, I think of the overall story of like the movie Troy. And I think of the things that kind of come after the events of the Iliad, things that are not mentioned directly in it, but that take place afterwards. Things like the well-known aspect of the Trojan horse, and then also the term the Achilles heel. So I think of those sorts of things as possible things that could be touched on in part 2 of this. But like now my brain is working in that direction based on this title. I'm thinking about the Iliad, I'm thinking about the Trojan War, I'm thinking about Achilles, I'm thinking about Trojan horses, all that kind of stuff I'm thinking about based on this title. So that kind of led me into thinking that something that happens in these two episodes are going to revolve around a war, which to this point, we don't really have a war. Like to this point, we've had, Franklin wants to, do this real estate shit. He wants to get Louis and Jerome involved. They're not interested. He wants Leon's having issues revolving around the racism of the police. Teddy's come back. Like we're wondering about Alton. But there's not really any conflict here just yet. But as the name of the episode implies, the war starts here. So I want to open by saying I have a theory at who is behind everything that's going to happen here, but I'm saving it for the end of the video. And I'm sorry if you're somebody who normally doesn't sit through maybe the whole video. Maybe you watch 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and you're like, yeah, fuck this, I'm done. But I'm not doing this to keep you here till the end of the video. And I promise it's not going to be a long wait. I'm going to spend not most of the video, but a lot of this video talking about my theory regarding what's going on here. But it's because my theory revolves around a spoiler. And it's not a spoiler in I know something that happens, but it's a spoiler, it's knowledge that I have going into the season that now, given the events of this episode, have a little bit more context. So if you don't want to be potentially spoiled, because I could be wrong, this is still fully a theory, but in case you don't want to be potentially spoiled on what could be happening here, and you're just like, oh man, that was really cool, I can't wait to see what happens next week, then you're going to want to probably cut this video off when I start talking about my idea about what happened. But like I said, again, it's kind of a spoiler, but it does involve publicly known knowledge that was known prior to the start of the season. So it's knowledge that's out there. It's just lesser known knowledge, and I'm just applying kind of common sense to craft this theory. So I did want to throw that out there. I am going to talk about it, but I'm waiting to the end of the video. So before we get into how this war kicks off, we have a couple of scenes that involve Louis and Jerome and Sissy. We see Louis and Jerome essentially refuse to give Franklin the money that he needs to make this real estate deal. Franklin says he'll even cut the price in half to $5 million. They only need 10% up front. And Louie's like, yeah, that's all good, but your dreams aren't our dreams, man. We're not in this. Franklin's pissed off. He leaves. And Veronique kind of says something to the effect of like, maybe somebody else should talk to Louie, implying herself. Then we also see Sissy meeting with that guy Ruben again that we saw at the end of the last episode. And we didn't really know too much about what her goal was. Well, we know about the goal, but we don't know the plan with this Ruben guy, or necessarily even really who Ruben was at that time. Like, at the end of the last episode, he could have been a hitman, but in this episode, he does seem to be some sort of intelligence officer or someone who has some interest in stopping Teddy. And he asks Sissy, he gives her like a pen that I'm assuming is bugged. And, well, I'm not assuming, they say is bugged. And he essentially wants her to like leave it in Franklin's office. And he assures her like, I'm not interested in Franklin, but if I want to get Teddy, I need to know the inner workings of his business. And in that moment, again, I'm still thinking about the Iliad. I'm thinking about Trojan horses and shit, and being infiltrated by entities that you think are safe. And it made me wonder if Sissy was going to be like a Trojan horse kind of, that was going to not necessarily sneak in, but walk in with sneaky intentions and set them up to be taken down from the inside. But Sissy's like, nope, I'm not doing anything that's going to put my son in danger. And then that's essentially where we end before we start to see all of these events go into place that set the entire Saint crew up to be potentially killed, but I think also set up the events that are going to make up the rest of this season. Because also, we don't have a primary antagonist yet. Like, you think of previous, seasons, it might have been Scully or Manboy or whatever. We're 4 episodes in, and we didn't have a primary antagonist yet. And I think that person is going to come to light for these final episodes of this season. So, I'm going to start with Leon, just because it's the quickest one to get through. And then I'm going to end with talking about what happens to everyone else, essentially. So Leon decides to go meet with Avi, and we think he's going to pick up this heavy artillery that he asked Avi for before, but he seems to have kind of been talked out of it. He tells Avi, like, I'm straight on the heavy artillery, just give me, like, regular guns and shit. And Avi's, like, pissed off. He says, like, this ain't Macy's, motherfucker. can't just get a return receipt and be like, I'm good. And at that moment, a drive-by happens, and nobody important is hit, but the drive-by takes place. Somewhere else, Sissy, Veronique, Jerome, and Louie are all meeting, and I'm thinking this is the meeting where Veronique wants to talk to Jerome and Louie, but instead, Sissy is talking to him, and she's essentially making a case like, look, I'm not asking you to help Franklin, I'm just asking you to like look long-term and look on what your end game is here. And she notes that both Jerome and Louie get pages. Jerome leaves to call back, and he calls back Franklin. After this call, during this call, they also get hit with a drive-by. Again, no one is hurt who's important to the story, but the drive-by takes place. Both times, both with Leon and with them, it's like black guys. They look like gang members. They got bandanas covering their faces. It looks like it's kind of like the same people. It can't be the same. Well, I mean, I guess it could be literally the same car, but I think no. Franklin's hit was the first one that they showed, and he bashed their car in. So I'm thinking these are different people, but they're all working for the same entity. So they get hit. Nobody gets hurt, but now we know that this is an effort that's being done on all fronts, because Franklin overhears Jerome and them getting shot at while he's telling them about them just having been shot at, them being him and Gustavo. So moving on to Franklin and Gustavo, Franklin shows up for the drop like he normally does to meet with Teddy and Gustavo. Peaches isn't there, and he's replaced by some new guy that we don't know. And Franklin says that Peaches called in sick. And we're gonna talk about Peaches as well, because I'm leaning into my theory 10 times harder than I was before. my episode 1 theory is still alive in episode 5, and I think it's even more solid. But during the usual drop, they get run up on. Drive by again. Well, actually, it's not a drive by; it's a drive up. They pull up, They start shooting. Teddy's hitting the shoulder. Well, kind of like in the shoulder kind of chest area. And he hops in his car and bails out. Gustavo gets grazed on the shoulder. Him and Franklin hop in the car. They back into the assailant's car, and then they leave. But their car breaks down, and they have to hide in this crawl space until everything is safe. Eventually, they get out. Well, they emerge. I can't say get out. It makes it like they escaped. Eventually, they emerge, and they leave the money in that crawl space, which I think is going to be important later. And their idea is to break into an abandoned house and use the phone. They break into an abandoned house that has like a bear and an alligator in it. And clearly this house is the home of a taxidermist. And they get hit with some blow darts. They knock out and they wake up in a cage next to a tiger. And that's how the episode ends. And I think that's kind of just, this portion of the episode was kind of just that exhilarating, like, what's going to happen next situation. Because when Franklin was making his call to Jerome, we see like what looks like a group of gang members run up on them and ask about what's in the bag. And they have like bats and shit like that, knives. Franklin pulls out his gun, which we already know is empty, and they run off. But then a couple of other guys come up with guns, and that's how they end up getting chased into the crawl space. So that whole part of the episode, I think, kind of just plays out as like a cool action sequence. I don't think that any of this is going to tie into the main storyline. I think it's just something done to kind of like incapacitate Franklin and Gustavo while Jerome, Louis, and Leon work on what they think is going to be the solution to who's coming after them. Now, Jerome wants to look into Peaches. And well, he doesn't want to look into Peaches, but he's the best one to look into Peaches because he's known Peaches forever. So Louis sends him to check on Peaches. And then Leon goes to check in on Black Diamond and Dallas, who are the two former strippers that we've seen that are now part of Franklin's crew, but originally were hired by Khadijah to find Leon. Because if you remember last year, or that might have even been season 3, when Leon shot Scully and Khadijah's kid, Scully had it out for him, wanted him dead. So Khadijah hired Black Diamond and Dallas to get him, and they brought like some other motherfucker that wasn't Leon to did they bring him to Manboy? I don't know, I can't remember. But either way, they brought the wrong motherfucker. And eventually Franklin pays them to turn on Khadijah, and that's how they end up catching Khadijah, and now they're part of his crew. So Leon's going to look for them because they've been ghost for the whole episode. So their whereabouts are unaccounted for. So hey, maybe they're involved in this somehow. They already were only moderately trustworthy in the first place. Let's look into them. And then Peaches called in sick, and now we have to look into him as well, because that's how things happen in these mob movies and shit, right? It's always the guy like, one person from the crew called in sick, and then that's when the hit happens, and that's how we know that the person who called in sick was the person behind the hit. And I think that's what we're meant to take away from this episode. We're supposed to be looking like, okay, Peaches is probably the perpetrator here because he called off sick, and that just so happens to be when they got hit. Now's where I'm going to start talking about my theory on what happened here. So if you don't want to potentially be spoiled, I'm just saying potentially because, again, I don't know. But if you don't want to potentially be spoiled on the idea that I'm at least partially right, you're going to want to stop this video now. But if you want to get into the conversation, let's talk about it, about what we think happened. This is where we talk about it. So I want to start by talking about Peaches because Peaches is at the forefront, I think, of any theories that might exist around who's involved. Obviously, Peaches would have knowledge on the whereabouts of, at the very least, Franklin. And he seems like a probable person to be a suspect. He seems like a valid suspect. My issue with Peaches is, one, Peaches has never struck me as someone who is disloyal. And two, usually the idea of that close person that gets sick being the person who betrays someone usually revolves around that person not actually being sick. But we know Peaches is actually sick. And real quick on Peaches, as a kind of like a sidebar, I said in my first video that I think Peaches has something more serious than a cold, something potentially life-threatening. And I said that I think he might have HIV that could come from any number of ways. That's not me saying that I think Peaches is gay. I have no idea. But Peaches could have got that through any form of sex, or he could have got it through any form of like needle needle drugs or anything like that. Also, in this episode, we meet Parissa, who we don't know who she is, but she has some sort of affiliation with Teddy. After Teddy gets shot, he goes to her crib. She patches him up. She's a real fucking weirdo. She's talking about how surgery, she used to get off on surgery, how she had dreams of getting ate out by a guy whose teeth she just knocked out. She finger bangs herself after patching Teddy up. Definitely a weird person, right? And she even mentions, I think at some point, she says something like, here I can only do nurse stuff, something like that, anesthetic, which makes me think that she used to be a surgeon somewhere else, and for whatever reason, she can't be a surgeon there anymore and had to come here, and now she can't be a surgeon here without going through, all the schooling or whatever here, or maybe she's like a criminal or some degree, I don't know. But she obviously has some sort of past where she used to be a surgeon, but now she can't be one here. The reason I mention her, aside from the fact that we are introduced to a new character, is the fact that when she's working on Teddy, she puts on rubber gloves and says that she wants to be careful dealing with blood because someone at the hospital got AIDS dealing with one of their patients. Well, she says HIV, dealing with one of their patients. I don't think it's a coincidence that this person mentions someone getting HIV at the same time as I've been hypothesizing this entire season that that's what Peaches has. So I think Peaches is legitimately calling off sick. His sickness has taken a turn for the worst. I think that when Jerome goes to look for Peaches, he's legitimately going to find Peaches really fucking sick. He's going to take Peaches to the hospital, and that's when we're going to find out that Peaches has HIV. I don't think Peaches is involved at all. I think that's what's going to happen with him. But him calling off sick is a good way for the show to put Peaches in our crosshairs as a suspect. But the show has also let us know that he is actually sick. So I think that's kind of like what they call a red herring to make us kind of like put our sights on Peaches and assume that he's involved when we know he's actually sick. And I think that the investigation to Peaches is how we're going to find out that he actually has HIV. Then you take Black Diamond and Dallas. I just don't think that they even have the ability to orchestrate something like that or to even be manipulated in a way to aid in something like that. I think, again, they're another red herring because they're someone that we know can't necessarily be trusted because their allegiances change based on who's paying them. But they've seemed fairly loyal so far. And then I also don't think Black Diamond and Dallas are well integrated enough to have the knowledge of where everyone would be at to where they can set up, say like, hey, this is where Jerome and them gonna be. This is where Franklin gonna be. Like knowing where the drop site is at. Like I don't feel like they would have that kind of knowledge. Peaches would have the knowledge on the drop site, but how would Peaches know that that Jerome and Louie are gonna meet with Sissy and Veronique at this restaurant for lunch? How would Peaches know that Leon is going to meet with Avi? He wouldn't know that. Nobody would. So that leads me to my kind of starting on my theory. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to read something off to the side here. And what I'm going to read is a casting list. Before the season started, there was a list of, okay, here's who all going to be back, played by blank actor. Then there's a section, and you always will find this kind of stuff if you read an article about casting, which I usually don't read those, but if you read the article about casting, they'll at the end have a section like, here are the new characters being introduced, and it won't even give necessarily the actor. Sometimes it might just give the character and then a description of that character. And then depending on what article you're reading, sometimes they'll also name the actor. But I'm going to read you this list of these characters that were to be added for this season. First is Brandon J. McLaren as Detective Buckley. We've met Buckley, Bo Buckley. He's been around the whole time. I love how Jerome cut into him when he asked him to give him a thank you. I'm not repeating what Jerome said that made me laugh because I try not to use that word on this channel. But hey, you got to know what word it is because I use every other word other than this one on the channel. So, but I thought that was a real funny moment. But Brandon J. McLaren is Detective Buckley. He'll portray a detective with the community resources against street hoodlums, aka Crash Unit, who is tough on the outside but constantly battling his own demons, including drug addiction and failing marriage. Devon Tile is Veronique. We've met her already as well in episode 1. She's smart, ambitious, with worldly sophistication, but also appreciates the small things and is not completely defined by her drive. Tiffany Lonsdale as Parissa. We met her in this episode. She's strong-willed, powerful, educated, sexually, she sure is, and with a droll and dry sense of humor. This former physician has a history with Teddy and tends to him after he's been hurt. So episode 4, we're like, who the fuck is that? Episode 5, we now know her. Here's the one I want to read to you. Devon Nixon is Kane Hamilton, a powerful and manipulative ex-con who used to be an integral part of the neighborhood. He's almost like an older brother figure for Franklin and Leon. He's also actually Kevin's biological brother. I think that's who's behind this. Kane Hamilton. Reason 1, powerful and manipulative ex-con. So this guy was in prison at some point. Used to be an integral part of the neighborhood. Lets me know that he has people who are loyal to him. Almost like an older brother figure for Franklin and Leon, and is also actually Kevin's biological brother. Motive. Franklin killed Kevin at, what was that, season 1, season 2, something like that? Y'all remember Kevin, right? Franklin killed Kevin. Motive. Let's say Kevin's older brother was in prison at the time. He gets out of prison, finds out, oh, Franklin Saint killed my brother. That used to be my homie. Oh, gotta take care of him. Can't have that. How? I think it's just a simple situation of watching. Because like I said, I don't think Peaches would know where everyone was going to be at what time. I don't think Black Diamond and Dallas would know where everyone was going to be at one time. But what could happen is that they could be watched. Like Kane could have been planning this out for however long, and he could have got easily the location. Oh, where does Franklin hang out at? Franklin's at this real estate office, and Franklin works out of this club. Jerome and Louie operate out of this club. Where else might we have seen Franklin? Oh, Franklin and Leon in the projects. Like these are like Franklin could easily be found, especially if you're somebody like this guy who has connections into the gangs, into the neighborhood, is well known, well respected, probably fresh out of prison. Like, oh shit, so-and-so back, that's what's up. People would be loyal to him. Easily, he could find out where Franklin is, where Franklin goes, where Leon is, where Leon goes, where Jerome is, where Jerome and Louie go, all that. He could find that information. Could have had his people, again, I'm assuming he's got people loyal to him. Could have had his people, say, at the club. Jerome and Louie leave out, they follow them. Boom, there's the hit attempt. That also just Sissy and Veronique would have been collateral damage, I'm thinking. But follow Jerome and Louie from the club, boom, you got them. Follow Franklin from the real estate office or from the club to the drop spot, boom, you got them. You already know Leon operates out of the projects. Follow Leon from the projects to where he meets with Avi, boom, you got him. So that's my theory. I'm at 23 minutes. That's my theory. I think it is Kane Hamilton, the older brother of Kevin. Motive, revenge for Franklin shooting Kevin. And how he did it, I'm assuming he just had people watching the projects, watching the club, watching the real estate spot, and was able to follow them to the various locations where they had the attempts on them taken out at. And we're going to find out next week that when Jerome goes to investigate Peaches as a suspect, we're going to find out Peaches is actually sick and has HIV. And I don't know what's going to happen with Black Diamond in Dallas, but I'm assuming they're not going to be behind it. So, exciting episode. I'm excited to see what happens in part 2, the Iliad part 2. I'm wondering if there's going to be some sort of additional Greek mythology interjected into that as well. Like, are we going to see something that's kind of refers to like the Achilles heel? Or anything to how that war ends, the Trojan War ends. Anything like a Trojan horse or anything like that. I don't know, but it's called the Iliad for a reason, and I kind of feel like it has to do with more than just the back and forth of a war. You could call a whole season the Iliad if you wanted to. The Iliad part 1 through the Iliad part 10 if you want it. But that's all I got for this week. I will see you guys next week for episode 6, the Iliad part 2. Until then, peace.